Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Good Governance Academy webinar. It's really great to see so many people who registered. Um, and we've seen people joining from all over the world today in the Good Governance Academy webinar. My name is Carolyn Chalmers, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Good Governance Academy. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. For those joining us for the first time, the Good Governance Academy, or GGA, is a not-for-profit initiative that brings together academia, business, civil society, and regulators to share governance knowledge and build capacity across the world. We're proud to be closely aligned with over 200 support member organizations, representing over 4 million people in 167 countries. The Academy's purpose is simple: to make governance education accessible to everyone, everywhere. Through our webinars, colloquia, and collaborative learning programs, we bring together leaders, academics, and practitioners to explore emerging issues from ethics and sustainability to technology, leadership, and the future of boards. If you haven't yet joined our community, I warmly invite you to do so. Membership is completely free, and it connects you with a global network of professionals who care deeply about good governance and sustainable leadership. You'll receive invitations to upcoming events, thought leadership resources, and opportunities to participate in our collaborative learning initiatives. You can register quickly and easily at goodgovernance.academy, and Evelyn will pop that in the chat for you. But before we begin, let's take a quick moment to familiarize ourselves with the tools available to you today. First of all, reactions. Please feel free to use the reaction buttons throughout the session to show your engagement and appreciation, the hearts and the claps. And the chat, of course, please tell us where you're dialing in from. It's always inspiring to see how global our audience is. And if you'd like to connect with others, you're most welcome to share your LinkedIn profile in the chat. The Q&A function. If you have a question for the speakers, please post it in the Q&A panel. This ensures that your question is seen and doesn't get lost in the chat stream. And finally, really important, translation captions. You can now enable live translation captions in multiple languages. Simply click at the bottom the CC button. If you can't see the buttons, click your Alt key on your keyboard. You'll get the buttons and the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language. Thank you again once again for joining us and for being part of this international movement to advance governance and leadership for a better world. Please sit back, engage, and enjoy what promises to be an inspiring and thought-provoking discussion today. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to two exceptional contributors to the field of crisis leadership and resilience. First, Peter Willis, formerly of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, who co-led Cape Town Drought Response Learning Initiative. Peter's work captured deep cross-sector lessons from the Day Zero crisis, lessons that continue to shape how cities and organizations learn from and prepare for future shocks. We're also honored to have Gareth Morgan, the City of Cape Town's Executive Director for Future Planning and Resilience. Gareth has been central to the city's long-term resilience strategy and played a key leadership role in both the drought response and the city's COVID-19 response. Together, Peter and Gareth bring rich, real-world insight into what it means to become genuinely good at crises. And now you've written a book, Peter and Gareth. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what led you to write the book.
Sure. Shall I go first, Gareth? After you. No, after you. First of all, Carolyn, that was an amazing introduction. Thank you. So we knew of each other for a number of years because Gareth was a DA, Member of Parliament, responsible for the environmental portfolio in opposition for many years. And I was involved in the sustainability leadership teaching world, I guess, with the University of Cambridge. And then what brought us together was the drought, the Day Zero drought, as it became known, where as it was unwinding after the major crisis moment when we thought Cape Town could possibly run out of water, I got introduced to him formally about the idea of how do we capture the extraordinary amount of learning and adaptation that's taken place within the city government, within business, within ordinary households, and so on. Because this is going to happen again, if not for Cape Town, for other cities around the world. And we have learned so much, but it'll evaporate if we don't do something to capture it. And he was incredibly helpful to me in enabling the project that I started with a filmmaker friend to interview leaders who were involved in responding to the drought. We ended up interviewing 39 of them on camera, in depth. And Gareth was the guy who opened the doors into the city government and persuaded top officials and representatives to come and be interviewed. So we got to know each other through that. And then along came COVID afterwards, and we were both very busy learning in parallel while COVID was happening about what does it mean to lead well in this crisis. And it was after that, it was Gareth's idea, really. He said, you know, we should actually write a book about this. And I resisted for a while, but then I caved in about 18 months ago. And we spent last year writing, and this year we published. And it was a very enjoyable process. Gareth, what would you add?
Yeah, so I think Peter and I both enjoy learning and documenting. Through my own roles in those two very, very large crises, one of which was unique to Cape Town, the other of which everyone lived through wherever they are in the world. I really became fascinated with some of the patterns that were evident. And the book that Peter and I have written together is rather agnostic about the type of crisis a leader of an organization would face. And the way we've written that is that, and I could see it in the roles that I had in those two crises, that there really are some things that are common, irrespective of what shock event or crisis comes at you as a leader. And I was keen to explore that with Peter in the written form, which, as Peter said, we wrote little by little over the course of last year, refining our thinking as we went along, using really COVID and day zero in Cape Town just as a backdrop. The book isn't about those two events, but we use stories in order to explain various points. So I think the book will have application for readers who aspire to be good at crisis from around the world. But at essence, Peter and I both love learning, and we wanted to share some ideas.
Brilliant.
If I could say something about the who and the sort of purpose of the book was, I think we both recognize that it's incredibly difficult to get people who are busy and responsible in senior positions within organizations to take crisis preparation seriously, because they've got so many other things that relate to the present sort of regular functioning of their organizations. But we are so convinced that even a little application of intelligent thought and discussion with peers in peacetime can make a huge difference to what actually happens in your organization when normal disappears down a hole, that we thought this is worth actually getting out there. And we made it deliberately quite a short book. I mean, it's a thin paperback. We designed it to be read on a 2-hour plane journey. It's not academic. It's really readable. And we just want to spark the thought, hey, I actually could become quite good at crises, and crises are going to be our future. I think we both believe that we're not naive. Most people know that we're heading into very difficult waters for all kinds of reasons. So
I love how you say in peacetime, preparing in peacetime. I had to laugh at that. But I've been part of my IT background, been part of these business continuity plans and IT disasters and all of that. And we have all of these plans and these big manuals, and we have people come and test, and the auditors. And when crises do hit, and they do, kind of we make a plan. we make the plan. We actually don't
Yeah.
follow the plan. So how is this different?
Gareth, why don't you take that one?
So, yeah, look, I think we write about what we call the preparation paradox in our book. I mean, just to jump onto the idea that you just shared. I mean, in the day zero crisis, of course, Cape Town had a disaster hazard plan for drought. And droughts are fairly frequent experiences, probably for most cities around the world, and our city in particular, every 10 years or so, there is a drought. But reaching for that plan off the shelf, as that drought became more severe, it was very, very evident that it was not suitable. So there was the act of having a plan, but the extent of that particular crisis and what defined it and what made it particularly unique, which was really, at the far extremity of what a drought would be, 3 years of low rainfall, 2 of those which were the lowest rainfalls in close to 100 years, that plan was, quite frankly, not that helpful. Similarly, I would argue that many organizations that might have had disease-related plans on the eve of COVID might also have found that, that it wasn't particularly useful or helpful. Possibly different in the public health sector, but for large corporations and the like, it wouldn't have been. So you can prepare. And our auditors, as you would say, and I've spent the morning with our audit committee, so I know that environment very, very well, obviously are going to test various things and expect yourselves to test it. We get that. This book is really not for the person who is regularly running the BCM function or the disaster management function or the risk-related function, unless they really aspire to be the leader of the organization or are, in fact, the leader of the organization. So what is unique about this is what we're really saying is these plans have a role and have a place, but when a crisis of a significant magnitude, and we sort of put various criteria in the book around what we think that could feel like, it is overwhelming. The sense of asks on you as a leader, never let up. Tomorrow is going to be worse than today. There is a role for a leader here, and it cannot be outsourced to disaster management or BCM. They may have a role, but it is important for the leader to step up. And we think that at the end of the day, because we're agnostic about what the particular crisis is, that there are a range of capabilities you can build in your organization, as we said, in peacetime, which are important for the regular mission of almost every single organization anyway, but form the adaptable capabilities of an organization on the eve or during crisis, which can be repurposed rapidly in order to form the basis of the response to the crisis. So we're saying as a leader, put attention into these things that are important for your regular business, but ensure that they are able to withstand, obviously, the agility and changes that are required. And then, of course, in the substantial components of the book, we'll talk about the 4 phases of crisis and the unique roles that a leader would play in each of those 4 phases.
I'm just thinking, given that your focus is on governance, or a major part of your focus is in governance, it strikes me that it's important to say that from the perspective of governing an organization, from a board, for example, you would, while you can say that the CEO and the leadership team are super busy with the day-to-day running of the organization and achieving goals and so on, I think, and Gareth and I have talked about this, that the role of the board is to say, yes, wonderful, and we want to hear about what you're doing about the day-to-day and the near-term goals, but we believe that it is reasonable to say there are going to be major collapses of normal in the next months and years. And it is beholden on us as an organization with all our stakeholders to have thought about how we're going to respond to that. And we would say it's not enough. This is what the point Gareth's just been making. It's not enough to say to somebody who's a technical expert, go and produce a disaster plan, go and produce a business continuity. Yes, yes, yes. But the board, I think, should be asking the leadership team, have you paused long enough during peacetime to think, how good are we going to be when the floor disappears from under us? And what can we do reasonably without going overboard? Without going overboard to prepare. And then we get back to our regular business. It's not a big ask, but it's from a governance point of view. I think knowing the global circumstances are as they are, it's a kind of a dereliction of duty to say, no, everything's going to be fine, because that simply isn't realistic.
No, it's not true anymore. And how generic is your guidance? I mean, how generic is it? You say that it's applicable for all situations. What kind of guidance does it contain? Can you give us some examples?
Well, I would think that Gareth's alluded to these capabilities. There are 6 capabilities that we identify, and I'll leave Gareth to talk about those. And there are 4 phases we think, to any significant crisis. And I'll just quickly walk you through those. And just to say that in the book, we distinguish between, you can have a crisis when your colleague gets sick and doesn't turn up for 2 days. Feels like a crisis. We all have crises at home, domestic crises. So the word crisis is very elastic, but we're limiting it to ones where if you go outside of your organization and go out into the city or go to the next door country, everybody is experiencing this crisis. Well, it doesn't have to be the next door country, but think of Cape Town in the drought. It was not just the city administration's crisis. Everybody was in the crisis. COVID, everybody was in the crisis. It's that scale of crisis we're talking about. So the 4 phases we identify, we've talked already about the first one, which is peacetime, when there isn't a major crisis. And that's the time when it's really hard to focus on this because there's so much else to do. And why would we bother? Because there's never going to be a crisis. So there is then a transition into the second phase. And that transition is when you start getting weak early signals that something bad is coming down the pipeline. And there's an obligation, then we say, on leaders to pay attention, get some research done quickly, talk to an expert or two, gather a few people around and say, should we be taking this really seriously? The better organizations were doing this when the news came out of Wuhan around COVID. They were starting to say, well, this could go badly. It may be nothing, but let's just focus. So that's your sort of transitional task. And the second phase we call when the wave begins to break. This is when you realize from watching the news or simply seeing data and actual events in your surroundings, this is serious. And at a certain point, you're going to have to declare we are now in a crisis. And your job then is, there are several jobs we itemize, but one of the core ones is to create a crisis management team, which is usually slightly different from your regular management team, because they're going to focus sort of mainly on the crisis. Other people are going to keep the organization going. Bunch of other things you need to do during that phase. And then the third phase is what we call the turbulence. And what we mean that is once the crisis is kind of settled in, but you're not out of it. In fact, you may not even be able to see when you could be out of it. And not only is that very taxing on your people, your resources, your cash maybe, and your patience with each other, but it's also, that's the period when the crisis within the crisis shows up. Like, simple example with COVID was it looked like a health crisis for the first few weeks. Very quickly it became a supply crisis, and then an economic crisis, and then an employment crisis, and then a mental health crisis, none of which you could have foreseen at the beginning. So that's what you have to deal with during the third stage, the turbulence. And then there comes a time, amazingly, when these crises come to an end and you can see it starting to tail off. And that's a judgment call for the leader, is when you call the crisis over. And that's important because then people can stand down
Mm.
Some people need then to be given a proper rest because the stresses are enormous, particularly for certain people. And that's when you also start your learning process. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but we think you have to capture what you have learned as a leadership team from this experience. Bottle it while it's still warm. It'll really serve you later. Yeah, I think those are the
When
four
you
phases.
just before we go to Gareth, when you say bottle it, is that,
Mm.
do you document it? Do you put it into some training materials, something like that? Mm.
Very likely,
You
yes.
definitely don't.
Yeah.
Mm.
You have to be deliberate about this and actually write this down. So true story. I lead the program portfolio and project management function in the whole of metropolitan Cape Town. And after day zero, we sat down and we documented, well, everything. What did we do? What did we do wrong? What could we have done better? All of that kind of stuff. As the week early signals were a year and a half to 2 years coming out of Wuhan in.
We lost Gareth. I know. I was in the middle of
Yeah.
the story.
That was a story which I can't tell you either. It's
I
Gareth's
know.
story.
Well, as soon as he comes back,
Yeah,
he
we'll
can
pick
tell
him
us
up
the
on the
January
story.
phone.
2020.
Sorry, there
Sorry,
we
we
go.
lost you for a bit there,
And
Gareth.
as there, national government started from the day zero drought as the starting point for COVID-19 response.
Sorry,
Because
Gareth, we
as I
missed
said,
you.
You froze for about 15 seconds. So we lost.
We've got to please start the
so
story again
we took
because it
out the
was
learning.
lovely.
Yeah. So we took the learnings from the day zero drought, and we started our response to COVID by, interestingly enough, learning from the drought. We had documented it, and literally we could pull it from electronic files. And that's really kind of a good where I said that I've become quite agnostic about what the crisis is, because it was very useful to say, okay, where did strategy come into it? Where did the data come into this? Why and how did we design our program team for the crisis in a particular way? Now, I'm not saying we did things the same. And of course, you bring in your specialists that are unique to the crisis at hand. A public health specialist or epidemiologist is required in a public health crisis, wouldn't be required in a drought crisis. But the documentation was vitally important. And that really is good project management. Any good project manager would say that you always do that. So documentation is important. But may I say a few things sort of about these capabilities that are required? And that I wouldn't exactly call them sort of generic. They're going to be differently applied in different organizations, but they are very important. And I took these from the learnings from these two large-scale crises in Cape Town. The first was robust ICT infrastructure, the ability to have a place that is producing data, that has the ability to enable transfer of data, enable communications and the like, is very important in any crisis. The second thing is the data and its usability, its cleanliness, its ability to be manipulated, and having the right skills on hand in order to turn that data into the types of insights that are uniquely required in this crisis environment. Very hard to build that from scratch if you haven't already invested in those types of capabilities. The third thing is supply chain adaptability. Now, I think we all learned a lot about the relative strengths of our supply chains during COVID. And in some respects as well, we've also learned a lot about that during the Ukraine-Russia conflict because of associated impacts on the movement of goods through
now with
Suez.
tariffs.
Yeah, and very good point. Tariffs, the US administration's approach to tariffs as well also has associated impacts. So supply chain adaptability is very important. Not overly relying on single suppliers, understanding actually the full value chain of your own supply chain is also very, very important. The ability to understand that, to be able to make moves during crisis is important. And you could go as far as the types of contracts that govern your supply, the clauses on force majeure, those types of things. Very, very important in peacetime to get this right. The next one I would say as well is communication and communication protocols. Organizations communicate. They have their reasons to do it. They're communicating to their stakeholders, whether it be their customers or their own employees or their board and the like. So those things are very, very important. In crisis, that is going to need to be repurposed for whatever the communication imperatives are of the crisis. And I would think we think that is a very important capability to work on in peacetime as well. Then also partnerships are important. I learned this extensively during the Day Zero drought. It took us quite a long time as a city government and a leadership cohort to really understand that the solutions to that drought, which ultimately lay with 4.1 million people driving down consumption, could not be achieved alone as a government. It required partnerships with other stakeholders, the business sector, obviously households, other spheres of government. And interestingly enough, the building of partnerships required then sustenance during peacetime. It became remarkable that we could rely on those same partnerships for the drought crisis in the COVID crisis, because they were still very warm and to some extent have been quite well serviced. Additional content had been added to those partnerships. Being able to call on others to help in crisis is vitally, vitally important. The last one I'll mention, which is for me really the absolute secret behind the effectiveness of a leader being able to say, here is the strategy, now we're going to implement it, is high quality project execution skills. So building a cohort of project managers who don't have to be good at public health or don't have to be good at drought, but they have the ability to be able to turn strategies into actions in the appropriate project management spaces, and then to drive performance so that a leader is able to performance manage, test results, and change strategy if necessary, is exceptionally important for an organization to have. Not everyone is a good project manager. So I'm really talking here about high quality skills that can be pointed at various problems and for the purposes of execution. And those are 6 capabilities that through our analysis, we found useful for any crisis that can be built on, that can add to the regular mission of any organization, whether a government, whether an NGO, or whether a business, that can form the basis under rapid shock to design the types of responses that can navigate you through the turbulence, as Peter said, and ultimately to relative safety during the learning and recovery stage.
Amazing. So those skills are not specifically for a crisis, but they are the absolute core capabilities to be able to respond. So they'll be doing their normal operational, implementing new systems and doing various project management activities, communicating with stakeholders, gathering data, doing data analytics, management information. And that capabilities, as long as it's knocking around the organization, that capability is going to stand you in good stead when you're leveraging them in a crisis situation. So that's really important, is that capability is not new, it's there.
Let me just pick up. I love the way you said knocking about the organization. And I think that is a good way of describing it. And it links Peter sort of alluded to it earlier on when he spoke about the crisis team. But I actually want to go a little bit further than where Peter left that off. I like the knocking about the organization, because in a crisis, a leader has to go and fetch those resources. They're close by, they're in the organization, but they're not necessarily in the way that is required for that crisis. And so we argue very clearly in our book that during a crisis, a leader of an organization should be prepared to, and we're quite provocative about it, break the organogram. Because you have a regular management structure that drives the performance of the organization, whatever it may be. But in a crisis, not everyone is good at crisis. That's the first thing. And a leader needs to be comfortable in able to say, I'm going to lift these people here up, I'm going to lift these. I'm going to say to these people gently, you know what, sit this one out, go and do what you need to do, attend to the ongoing needs of the organization. We'll talk to you and give you information, and we'll call you back when we navigate. And so breaking the organogram and building the right team is very important. Egos need to be put aside. Safety and ultimately thriving on the other end is the key goal. And that means lifting up people and putting them into new temporary structures, those that, as you say, are knocking about the organization. That's what breaking the organogram means for the purposes of survival and ultimately thriving.
And of course, if you're going to, I could sort of feel a little frisson when you say that you're going to need to sort of put some people to do the ordinary stuff, and some you're going to say, come with me, we're going to do the crisis management stuff. That is possible to do without having a rebellion or massively hurting people's feelings so that they actually withdraw their support. If you have built a high-functioning culture during peacetime, so the leader who has built a culture of willingness during peacetime will not have a problem when he or she says just what Gareth has said. Okay, I need these kinds of people and these kinds of skills in my war room, my crisis management room. The rest of you, you know what to do, and we're going to talk, but I'm going to be talking a little more frequently to this lot, and nobody's going to be going off in a huff in a corner to say, oh, I'm not being treated like I should be. That's culture. And you can't make that happen from scratch when the crisis happens.
There are quite a few questions and points here, sorry, Peter, that around testing. We need to do drills, we need to test this. Is this something at this level that you can actually test?
That's a very interesting question. My gut feeling is no, because, well, it certainly doesn't harm to do a test, but bear in mind everything Gareth's been saying, that you'll be testing a very specific crisis. Let's imagine the internet goes down, or we lose electricity for a couple of days, or whatever you decide is going to be your test. Then it's very easy for everybody to think, oh, this is an internet crisis, or this is an electricity crisis. And what we're really interested in is that this is a quality of leadership thinking, is we want leaders to start exercising their minds around, and everybody's been through a crisis now. We've all been through COVID, and most people have been through other crises as well. So it's not as though it's a foreign idea. To start applying their minds to where can we build strength and patch up possible weaknesses from a leadership perspective. And for that, you don't need to do a mass simulation. So that's my view, but I haven't heard Gareth's view on this, so I'm interested.
So, yeah, I mean, I basically agree, but I want to associate myself with, for example, Deirdre's comment, which I made a little comment on it as well. I think Deirdre is exactly right. I've thought about this, and this is exactly how I lead in my own organization. And actually, in my own organization, from a governance point of view, I lead the risk function. It has a specific role. I lead the business continuity management function. I lead the resilience function, which in my organization, we've put risk resilience and BCM all together under one department. And yes, we would regularly stress test various processes in our organization. And I think that is always useful to a client's department, whether you're testing a revenue service in our metro, or doing an evacuation from a public stadium. But Deirdre's right, and I've always thought this as well. It's not about trying to get the plan perfect, because when the crisis arrives, it's going to be somewhat different. it's about testing ourselves and our capabilities as humans in the crisis, and as leaders, for those of us who have those particular roles in the crisis. It's about learning a little bit about who we are and how we respond. And in our book, we speak, there's a substantial chapter called Know Yourself, because we all turn up in very, very different ways. I want to know under stress how I'm possibly going to turn up, not the specifics of the crisis. Am I going to go into a dark place? Am I going to clam up? Am I going to shout? Am I going to be a know-it-all? Am I going to fear making a decision? We all turn up in different ways. I think that is very, very important. And there's nothing generic about that. We are also different. So yes, our plans, we can always make them absolutely better. And some things work quite well in operating procedures. I have no problem with that. But I like to keep the muscle memory strong at all time. When the next crisis emerges, we should be able to go to a place to be able to say, I've got this. I have enough inside of me, and I have enough capabilities around me that no matter how this crisis manifests, we are going to be okay. And more importantly, as the leader, I'm going to step up, declare the crisis, if it's the right thing to do, and march us through this particular challenge until we get to an end. It's that thing which I think is worth testing.
Peter, can you add to that?
Yeah. No, because I trust. I'm listening with half an ear to Gareth, and he sounds like he's talking his usual good sense. So I thought I'm going to let him talk while I was reading Damien's
notes,
questions, which are interesting
Damien's
questions.
Damien's got a good point there about CEOs. What happens if you have a CEO that, know yourself, actually can't stand up?
You took the CEOs and board being completely paralyzed within inaction. And is there a case for handing over the management of the crisis to experts?
Yes.
I mean, yes. You're nodding and saying yes.
Yeah, look, our book is about being good in crisis as a leader. There's no doubt about it. But I'm very open to the fact that some people who are in leadership positions are not going to be good at crisis. And they should read the book in order to get better. There's no doubt about it. But
or to realize that they should resign. Yes.
Knowing yourself is very, very important. A CEO who, in that moment, is good at everything else, but that crisis hits and says, you know what, I'm not the right person to do this. That is a big, big moment, and is a good choice to make. It links to the breaking the organogram point. And let me use the practical example here. In the COVID response, we're the municipal government for 5 million people nowadays. We don't lead the public health sector, but we contribute to the public health sector, and we deliver energy, water, and waste to 5 million people. So for us, it is an issue of continuity. We have to continue to deliver energy, water, and waste while there's a public health crisis going on. And if we don't do this, we could end up accentuating the public health crisis. It wasn't actually the city manager of Cape Town, who's a phenomenally excellent leader, and in fact, a governance guru. But that is what that particular, our CEO, is exceptionally good at. He knew he wasn't the right person to lead the crisis. And so he handpicked an executive to say, you build, you break the organogram. And we then set up the governance of how that reported upwards, but with full authority, the ability to say, for this purpose, I am going to lead. So I'm talking about the executive. I will lead this entire thing, and the CEO will trust me. So we must be open to the fact that some leaders are not going to be able to do this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I get it. I read Damien's question as being more about bringing in experts like consultants. That's how I read it. I may be misinterpreting you, Damien, but in that case, my gut feeling is no, because the story you're telling, Gareth, this was a definite insider, a senior executive within the municipality's structures who was told, you're the one, I'm going to sit back and
Because
let
they
you,
know the environment.
because they know, and there's a real possibility of owning it. To bring in an outsider because they have expertise in this type of crisis, or in, I'm a crisis management consultant, doesn't work for me. I can see all kinds of problems there.
I have, yeah. So, you can't outsource leadership. There's no doubt about
No.
it. The leaders have to come. Well, it doesn't have to be the CEO necessarily, but the leaders must come from inside the organization. There is a case to be made for bringing in technical support. That's absolutely.
Yeah.
If there's a particular piece of knowledge that you don't have that you could get and bring that in temporarily, 100%. I don't. And in the way, when we design our crisis organograms, Peter and I, in the book, we always have program leads that are specific content specialists on the actual nature of what is going on. And there's always a role for strategic advice coming into the leader. And perhaps that isn't necessarily available in the organization. But you cannot outsource leadership. You could delegate it in your organization, but you can't outsource.
That's the difference. Thank you. Yeah.
And as a board, having to prepare your organization for crises, as you say, Peter, it's going to happen. It's just a case of when, not if. So what were the key, you've described the process, happy, something that we on the board need to be aware of, just those signals that come through. And then we've got those capabilities, the 6 capabilities that we need to have in place. So the book really helps the board to be able to ask pointed questions of the executive management. Is there anything else that, besides saying to the CEO, you have to go and read this book now, that, you would advise the board to guide and direct management to do in preparation?
In preparation, no, I think that those are the 2 most important things. Is just to have a conversation with your leadership, in a way to put aside the regular agenda items for meetings with the executive team, board and executive, and say, let's assume that we are, as an organization, going to hit a major crisis sometime. And let's have a think about these capabilities. Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? And so on. That's the preparation. The one thing I would add, which we touch on in the book, I think we do, is that it's very tempting for some boards or some chairman or some board members to get over-involved in the running of the crisis. Because to go back to Gareth's point about how crisis affects people differently and brings out different aspects of their character, some board members will find that they want to roll up their sleeves. I mean, they may have been executives in their careers, and they want to come in and say, right, let's do it like this. And suddenly they're thinking like an executive, which I think is a really risky thing to get into. So that's something that the board, I think, should prepare themselves by saying, do we agree that when a major crisis comes, our role is to support the executive, to say, listen, this is going to be tough for you. We are here for you. We will, anything you need, we will do our best to supply it and so on. And we will give you rapid turnaround of decisions if you ask for decisions. But we are also going to agree that it's hands off, and the executive must work out how they're going to handle this. They can talk to us all they like, but it is not for us to micromanage alongside them.
Very, very important, because they'll be itching, right?
Itching.
And
some of them will be very successful, high achieving.
A-types.
And they may have been in big crises, in which case their advice may be helpful, but their role is as board members, non-executives, not running
too many
the show.
cooks.
Too many cooks.
Too many cooks. And so I know we're running out of time, and thank you for answering the questions in the Q&A. For me, it's the aftermath. Who is there to clean up the mess? And I find that this is, especially I've got an IT background, so especially in an IT crisis, that you've been doing things manually, and then nobody wants to take those manual records and put them in the system when the system's finally up. And it's the
Ah,
taking
yeah.
that pan and you're cleaning up afterwards. Maybe a question to you, Gareth. What kind of cleanup did you have to do after day zero? I think maybe slightly different. Maybe you did have cleanup, but certainly COVID.
So there are probably a few things to say here. Firstly, Peter has sort of briefly mentioned it. You as in that particular phase, it's important to have a moment when you say this crisis is now over. It's psychologically very, very important. I feel like COVID never, in many organizations, never really had that moment where the CEO said, okay, it's over. Protocols are relaxed. We can tolerate a higher degree of risk, and the like. It's very, very important to be able to say, and with that comes a bit of risk, because and an obvious question to ask me is like, how do you know the crisis is over? Well, you'll know, and a few times, if depending on how many crises you go through, you might get that wrong, and you roll back in, and that's what commonly keeps a leader from saying, let's keep on going. But you have to, for the sake of your people, say it is over, which signals something which is around recovery, but it also is around appreciation, thanks, learning, and care for people, in the sense of, wow, that was really, really difficult. We acknowledge what we went through. Let's find ways now to rebuild ourselves as people. I don't want to speak more about learning, because we've actually spoken a lot about learning, but that's obviously also very, very important. Give people ways around you to be able to express themselves. It's very, very important. Not everyone has had the same experience internally in your organization of that crisis, and there's probably a lot of things that need to be said. And that can be done by a leader, that can be done by facilitators as well. All of those, for me, are important pivots. You cannot simply go, whatever, now we need to do this filing, or we have to move on to the next task, or let's build this new product. People cannot
All
go
done and
from
dusted
like that. So I'm sure there's a lot of hard slog in the example that you have used, and it's probably a pain to do that. But I think treating people with care, which is the role of a leader, and navigating that space in a deliberate way, is one way I would argue how you get into whatever that new way of working is going to be.
So I'm guessing, Carolyn, that in that example you gave from your personal experience, it would have made a difference to you facing that mountain of really uninteresting mop-up work if your leadership had done some of the things that Gareth's just saying, describing, and actually put themselves in your shoes and said, gee, first of all, well done for coming through this. You were actually amazing. And, have some awards, for goodness sake, or a special lunch together, or but then also to recognize that although the crisis is now over, for you to return to anything exciting and sort of stimulating and so on, you've got to go through, some people described it to me after day zero when I was doing all these filmed interviews. They said I had meanwhile accumulated over the year and a half of the crisis an inbox like this of things that were part of my day job, which I had to now turn to. And it was deeply depressing. And guess what? I got very, very sick. So many of the people I interviewed got ill in the month or two immediately after it was realized that the drought had broken. And nobody at the time had thought to say, don't worry, you may be perfectly healthy now, but take an extra week off. Or do something, you know what I mean? So mental and emotional fatigue is, you can do physical things to help people get over that. But I think that from a leader's perspective, what Gareth is calling care is really getting alongside you and saying, this is shitty now, actually. What you've got is the mopping up. How can I help? How can I make it easier? But it's going to be, you're going to realize it's worth it afterwards. And do you know what, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
It's part of the culture that you create as a leader that says these crises are real and we can't pretend. This is the other thing that's just as before a crisis, your board and your executive may pretend that crises are an aberration and they don't come, or they probably won't come. And if they do, oh, we'll cope with it. That's foolish. Equally, after it's happened, to say, okay, well, that was an aberration. Now let's get back to ordinary and normal is also foolish, because it isn't normal. You have actually, the whole thing has changed. And this is why Gareth came up with this idea of putting the word transformation in that fourth phase, that it's not just learning and recovery, but everything has changed. So
it has.
Acknowledge it, work out what has changed. It may be actually wonderful what's changed. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and wearing that, we did go through a crisis, and we actually stronger for it, and spending that time to decompress, and yeah,
guess what?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you do that, Gareth? I mean, in a city scenario, it was, the scale is just unimaginable. 5 million people potentially without water, all on your shoulders. It's just crazy. How do you decompress after something like that?
So I think we probably did better after COVID than we did after day zero, which is the benefit of learning. You also learn that you didn't do a good enough job of ending the previous one. So, I think we acknowledged the relief. So the day zero example is a triumphant example. And for those who aren't familiar with that example, we reduced, for a city of, at the time it was 4.1 million people, we collectively reduced our consumption of water by 50%. 50% in order to extend the life of those desperate dams. We have 6 massive dams. And, we did that under crisis conditions within about a year, but in reality, before we decided it was a crisis, it was about 18 months before that we knew we were in drought. So that is a massive achievement. No city in the world has ever before and ever since been able to reduce its consumption without ever turning the water off. So we didn't save water by turning the water off at night or whatever. Water flowed for that entire time. We did it because 4.1 million people did it. So the crisis response required everyone to get involved. So it's an interesting example because of the shared, I don't have a better word than trauma, but shared trauma of those of us inside of a city, and obviously 4.1 million people. Now, I don't want to take away from COVID. There was also trauma there, and in fact, there was death. But you did point to the day zero example. So how did we get out of that? We had to collectively celebrate by, we had to say, we are the first city to ever do it. We did it, not the government. The people of Cape Town saved Cape Town. We had to have an outcome that could be shared by everyone who meaningfully participated in it, which was almost everyone. But very importantly as well, was there had to be a commitment at the end of that, which had to be very, very public. And that could only be in the realm of the mayor and leadership, of political leadership, which was to say, our city as Cape Town will never, ever come close to running out of water again. So that is a public commitment that then gets translated into the next action list. And that is a peacetime action. We're going to build a water reuse plant. We're going to increase the amount of telemetry in the system to manage pressure. We're going to increase the aquifer abstraction. We're going to increase the size of the dam wall. We're going to fix more pipes that are leaking. because while drought will happen, and in fact, there are some very, very weak early signals in our system at the moment that we could be in drought next year. It doesn't mean we're going to be in extremity of drought, but we can never, as leaders in the city, ever present that scenario to our residents again. People have a tolerance for drought and some degree of driving down consumption, but nobody should be expected to drive down 50% of their water use. So
regularly,
appreciation, commitment to change, good communication thereafter were some of the things that I would like to say helped those who saved go, I did contribute to something. It was terrible, but they tell me it will never happen again. So, that was the storyboard of that scenario.
Very interesting. And the same would apply in an organization. Peter, you wanted to add?
Well, actually, in a way, it's a kind of a rounding off thought, which is that my experience of the city of Cape Town is that it has set about becoming good at crises because it decided to really learn from the experience of the drought and realize that there are a lot of things you can do that reduce the awfulness of the chaos and the confusion and the not knowing and the suffering and so on. And I can think that that would be the same in smaller organizations, corporations, and so on, is that if you, as a leadership, set about saying, well, why don't we become, that's basically the invitation in this book, is if you agree that we're going to be hitting crises and you're going to be in the hot seat, whether you're a CEO or someone in the leadership team somewhere, if you're going to be there, why not be there and being your best self? Why not make this an aspect of your excellence? Why not become one of those people who people want to have on your team because you love preparing for and being really good in those most difficult moments? And our sense is that crises bring out the very essence of your leadership capability and your gifts. So if you're serious, some people really enjoy being leaders. Hopefully, most leaders who end up as positional leaders like it. They get to be leaders not because, oh no, don't make me lead. Oh no, I don't want to lead. They actually want to lead. And if you like leading, then in this century, at this moment,
you must be able to lead crises.
You've got to. Why not make this the thing that you're really good at, rather than I'm brilliant when things are going well. When there's lots of money to be made, I'm your man.
Yeah, we see those often, right?
Yeah.
I think you guys have really done us a service by providing these lessons and making these lessons available beyond just the organization, just the city, and providing these lessons to everybody. I mean, what a gift to us to be able to learn from what you went through. And I think every single this needs to be compulsory reading for most leaders. Is they must have a look at this. I mean, it sounds so obvious, and I know when something looks so obvious, I always say that complexity or simplicity is complexity thought through. So if something's simple and looks obvious, you clearly thought this through really, really well, and you've made it into this little book that you can read on the plane to Joburg, and it's really, very useful. So how can people go about getting this book? I know Evelyn's put some links in there. Just tell us about the book lounges in Cape Town, right?
Yes, we launched the book at the Book Lounge. They're a wonderful independent bookstore. We love them to bits, and they will ship the book anywhere in South Africa. If you're outside South Africa, your best bet is to get it via Amazon as an ebook. There are no color photographs or complicated diagrams that you're going to find awkward on Kindle. It's all plain sailing. And if you want to get hold of us, you can reach us through the website, which Evelyn's also put there, Becoming Good at Crises.
Have you got any offerings around this that you can help people with? Do you help leaders work through this? Is it a consulting, mentoring, training? What services do you have?
There's an injection we can give to leaders. Just one shot and they become good at crises. It's quite expensive.
Right. Excellent.
And it hasn't been tested. But no, I don't have a more than full-time job like Gareth does. So I'm the one who goes and talks to groups of leaders, um, whether in the private sector or public sector, or to associations. If you're part of an association, I mean, like what we're doing now.
Mm.
But I'm very happy to go and talk and brainstorm with an organization's leadership group if they would find that helpful. We can do that online or in
Fantastic.
person. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Peter. This has been really, really insightful. I've learned a tremendous amount, and I've been in ISO 22301 business continuity and various, which is actually also
Oh,
started
I'm
in
so
South Africa,
sorry.
by the way.
Yeah, it
But
was.
I think this has been such a breath of fresh air for all of us in terms of leadership ability to understand yourself and also be able to take control and prepare in the peacetime. That's a word that I've got to take with me. So, Gareth, thank you so much. I know that you are extremely busy. Thank you so much, Peter. It's really been fabulous having you on the GGA webinar. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Our pleasure. Thank
Thank you
you.
Cheers.
so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.